So if you're just coming in, thanks for joining us. And just a couple housekeeping items. Make sure you're on mute so we're all minimizing background noise. I'll be spotlighting Coach Zoe and me at different points because we both have contributions. And then Q&A at any point, just jump into the chat, just so you don't forget what your question is. We'll read through the chat and we'll go through. So at any point, hang out in the chat, ask us questions. And we should probably get started because we got a lot to get through. We are excited, super stoked. Thanks for joining us. We might have a couple more people come in. But for now, looks like a good group. Lots of folks. Jeff is here. Marlene is here. So many awesome people. Marcy, Runji, lots of folks. Oh yeah, Buster. Oh yeah, it's a late night for Buster. In India, I believe. Very cool. Okay, so for folks who don't know me, I'm Coach K, and I'll just do a super quick intro. CarinaInkster.com is the hub of all vegan strength training related nerdery. So if you want articles or books, coaching, if you're interested, that's kind of the hub, which is probably how you know about this call in the first place. As you can tell, I'm a little obsessed with octopuses and sea creatures, apparently also brontosauruses. And Coach Zoe is one of my coach colleagues. She's the head coach at KI Health and Fitness. We have one more coach, Kaylin, who is actually in the same town that I'm in, Powell River in BC. And Coach Zoe is in North Vancouver. Fun fact, by the way, I met Coach Zoe and my husband Murray at the exact same time 17 years ago because they were working together back in the day. So back from when I was in Vancouver before I moved here. Just going to make sure that folks are muted. Hold on one second. I think that was maybe, there we go. Yeah, just make sure you're muted. Excellent. So quick intro to Coach Zoe. She joined our coaching team in 2020 and she's been working with our clients since then. She will do a little bit more of an intro before she does a little bit of protein intel for you. But just so you know, she's been around and working with our team for 3 years now almost, which is pretty awesome. Very cool. So we're going through 3 main topics. We're not going to spend a ton of time doing like the presentation part because we want to get to Q&A and interacting with folks. But we do have some intel to share. So we're doing protein myths first, everybody's favorite vegan subject, right? And then we're going to get into strength training. And I do have a PDF that I uploaded for you. So I'll just share the link and you can save the PDF so you can look at it later. And then we will also get into measuring progress. So they're all kind of related. Like the protein was related to strength training. Strength training is related to measuring progress, right? And just remember, anytime, put questions into the chat. And then after each little section, we'll go through a couple and then we'll do a big Q&A at the end. Does that sound good to everyone? Sweet. Okay, so I'm going to start with the myth that doesn't seem to go away. I don't know why. It's still around. I've been vegan for 20 years and I'm still asked questions like, well, where do you get your protein? I thought vegans don't get enough protein in their diet. Like this whole thing is still around for some reason. So there's kind of 2 parts to this myth, right? The first part is, well, how much protein do we actually need? Because there's a lot of BS around how much protein we need, right? And then the second part is, okay, so now that we know how much we need, where are we going to get that from as vegans or as vegetarians or as veg-curious people who are eating plants, right? So the first part about how much we need might be good news for you because it's probably less than you think. In a lot of cases, there's a lot of these kind of like get 40 to 50% of your calories from protein kind of meal plans out there, which are off the charts, way more than you need. So I don't know if folks here have checked out the protein calculator that we have on our website, but I am going to show it to you. I'll share my screen and just kind of show you how it works. And I will also give you some numbers. So for folks who want to take notes and get super nerdy about protein, I will share some numbers. So have a writing utensil or your notes app handy. Here's the deal. Most folks here have probably heard about 0.8 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day. Does this sound familiar to folks? People are like, oh yeah, you need only 0.8 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day. So if you have your body weight in pounds, divide it by 2.2. So that's fair. The thing there is, though, that's not an RDA. That's not like a recommended amount across the board for all humans. That is a minimum to prevent deficiencies. So there's a difference, right? This is a minimum amount of protein to prevent health issues. The thing is, everyone has different protein needs. It's not like iron or zinc or vitamin C where we can say, well, you need exactly this amount. It depends on your training, it depends on your activity levels, your body composition goals, whether or not you're currently in a calorie deficit, many variables, right? So we'll get to the numbers in a second. Generally, if you're someone who does endurance sports, kind of cardio based things, you'll be on the lower end of protein to leave more room for carbohydrates, which are the main energy source. And if you're doing more strength sports, then you'll be on the higher end of protein because you'll need more to repair your muscles after working out. So the dietitians of Canada, which are very similar to other organizations in the States and across the world, suggest that specifically for active folks, so they're saying dietary protein intakes to support things like repair, remodeling of muscles, protein turnover, right? Like specific to active folks. Here's the numbers. It ranges between 1.2 and 2 grams per kilo per day. So that's higher than the 0.8. This is for active folks, people who train, people who are doing weightlifting, all that kind of stuff. And then they also say higher intakes, so even higher than that, may be indicated for short periods during intensified training or when reducing energy intake. So that means if you're currently in fat loss or leaning out mode, you'll need more protein than someone who is not currently in a calorie deficit. So hopefully that makes sense. I do want to show you the the protein calculator that we have on our website. So just make sure that you write down 1.2 to 2 grams per kilo of body weight per day, because that's going to factor in to the calculator that I'm going to show you. Sharing my screen. Can everybody see what's on my screen right now? Yeah? Okay. So if you want to head to our website, you can just put in protein calculator. You don't have to put in vegan protein calculator. It will automatically take you there. But it's based on a whole bunch of variables, and we're basing it on these 3 bodies of research here. So Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is basically all registered nutrition professionals in the States, and then Dietitians of Canada, and American College of Sports Medicine. So let's see here. Let's do pounds, because I think most of us are probably doing pounds. Just as a sample, let's say, I don't know, 165. Here's the thing. If you're vegan or vegetarian, a lot of organizations, including the research that's been done by these folks here, will say that we just need a little extra protein to make sure we're absorbing the protein properly, because there's really high fiber foods, right? So let's say yes, because most of us are somewhere on the plant-based spectrum, I would assume. And this is what I just mentioned, the calorie deficit. So if you're currently in weight loss mode, in leaning out mode, you're going to need slightly more protein as well to make sure that you're not also losing muscle along with the fat, right? So let's say yes for both of those things. I think that takes care of a lot of folks in our group here. You can play around with this on your own. And then the only other variable is how active you are. The super duper high one is for folks who work out and have active jobs, which is probably not most of us at the moment. So you can kind of just see, right, like really intense training most days of the week or daily workouts, pick what makes sense for you. And it'll just spit out the grams of protein that you need per day based on all of these calculations in there. So feel free to play around with that. You know what, actually, I'll just paste this link right into our chat. It'll probably make it easier. And we can go from there. I'll just put it in there right now. And I would like to make sure that I have Coach Zoe as the co-host. Somehow I lost her as the co-host. There we go. She's back now. Because Coach Zoe is going to tell us a little bit about how we put that into practice. So first, you get the amount of protein you need per day. You can even do it right now if you have another screen open. And that's fine. You know, you have a number, but what does that mean for your breakfast? What does that mean for your lunch? What vegan foods are you going to add into your diet, right? So I'm going to remove my spotlight and I'm going to find, oh, there's so many folks here. Where's Coach Zoe? Oh, there she is.
I'm here.
You're here. I'm going to spotlight you. Okay. Can you do a quick intro for folks and then we'll get into
Definitely.
the nitty-gritty of protein?
Definitely. So as Coach K mentioned, I have been with the team since 2020. I am based in, I will admit, John, I am based in North Vancouver. I've been vegan for just over 13 years. My favorite types of movement are anything strength training, but I have a deep affinity for kettlebells. And I've also been boxing for about 8 years. So that's the second love of my life. There are a few. So I'm going to jump into some vegan/plant-based protein options. And before I list these, I want to share that I've kind of organized these. So the items that I'm listing first have the highest volume of protein per serving. And then the ones towards the middle and the bottom, the protein goes down. So I would just like to clarify that is not to imply that the items I list first or at the top are better than the others. But as Coach K alluded to previously, we all have different goals around protein. Some of us are eating more, some of us are eating less. So they're ranked like that just to explore the fact that we're talking about different percentages, and that will relate to all of us differently based on our areas of focus and our protein needs, okay? So right off the bat, we have what I will call the triple T. So that is tofu, that's tempeh, and TVP. TVP is kind of an old school source of protein. That acronym stands for textured vegetable protein. I would say it's one of the easiest things to prepare. It comes in a dehydrated granule, and all you really need to do is add hot water to it and your spices of choice, and in a few minutes you're good to go. So it's kind of like the instant oatmeal version, but very high protein. Then we have seitan. Some of you folks may know that that is an incredibly, incredibly high protein option, and it's made from vital wheat gluten. So that's one of our biggest allies. We have plant-based protein powder, plant-based protein bars. Coach K and I both have a few brands that we lean towards. We have the classics. So beans, lentils, legumes. My preference is to lean towards the canned version simply because they are very cost efficient and they're easy, but some folks may prefer to work with those from the dried form and soak them and prep them. Then we have faux meats. So we are very, very lucky to be at this stage with plant-based and vegan eating, in that I would say there are at least 5 alternatives for everything that we saw previously only made from animals and animal byproducts. So we have them in the fridge, we have freezer options, a whole myriad of things to choose from. High protein pasta, so we're talking about noodles that have a base like lentils or chickpeas or black beans. Then we kind of move to the second chunk. So this is when we bring in things like chia seeds, hemp hearts, flax, nuts, and other seeds. So these foods also have a protein percentage in them. It's just that that percentage is not as high as it's going to be in some of the foods that I listed towards the top of that list. One One thing that I did not include in this list that I would like to mention, but we often see included in lists about vegan protein sources, is quinoa. And the reason that I'm not going to include it in this list is not because it doesn't have protein in it, it just doesn't have a lot. So if you have a cup of cooked quinoa, that has about 8 grams of protein in it. For comparison, if you have 100 grams of cooked seitan, you have about 20 to 30 grams in that. Okay, so we're not demonizing quinoa. We're not saying you shouldn't have it, but just to kind of keep it in mind that there's a little bit of variance when it comes to that term, protein sources. All right. And then the last one, because I'm being very cognizant of time because we have a lot to get in here, something I just wanted to touch on for folks who may not have as developed of a relationship with tofu and soy products as some of us do. Tofu is an incredible source of protein. Sometimes we do see a lot of myths being perpetuated about it. That is that if you are perhaps male and you eat a lot of tofu, the hormones will cause you to grow man breasts and things like this, which are very pervasive. So I would just like to clarify, and this is actually featured in an episode of Coach K's podcast with Dr. Melissa Riley, and they speak about the subject of soy and hormones. So when we talk about the hormones that are in something like soy, those are phytoestrogens, and they occur in plants. They also occur in things like pistachios, and I thought this was quite funny, hops, which are used to make beer. Whereas estrogens occur in animals, and sometimes it's those two that get mixed up. So I just wanted to address that right off the bat because it is something that comes up quite a bit, and kick that one to the curb. So back to you, Coach K. I will mute myself.
Love it. You know what? I'm going to leave the spotlight on because for our next strength related topic, Coach Zoe is starting, and then I'll jump back in. So feel free to dump questions in the chat. You know, if you have any at this point, put them in there. We will, we'll do a Q&A. But let's move to our strength training piece, which is some myth busting around how to get results, which Coach Zoe will start us off with. And also the 6 fundamental strength training movement patterns that you need to make sure you have in your training plan, and how you can include those with whatever equipment you have available. So Coach Zoe, let's start with general, you know, how we deal with strength training with our clients and some myth busting. And then I will share my screen and we'll go into the 6 movement patterns.
All right. So first thing, I'm going to ask for some quick participation. If anyone wants to contribute an answer, just throw it into the chat. And my question for you is, what do you need to have at home to have the most perfect, ideal strength training setup? It's a bit of a trick question, but if anyone wants to throw anything in, your body, yes. Okay, nothing. Yes.
I think people are getting how this works.
Yeah.
What Nikki said.
What Nikki said. Yes.
Yourself and a willingness to move. Yeah, folks are getting it.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like folks who are familiar with us already kind of maybe knew where that one was going, but yes, all of those answers were the correct ones. And I think something that was perpetuated, especially during the pandemic when a lot of us were working out at home, was this notion that, you know, you need to have every single piece of equipment possible, and you need to have this very fancy thing and this very expensive thing, and that is the one way that you're going to get an efficient workout space at home. When in actuality, if you have a couple of resistance bands, you have hundreds of moves available. If you have one kettlebell, I got mine at London Drugs during the pandemic, you have tons of moves available. If you have water bottles or soup cans, a good couch, or even a bag of dog food, which I actually used once to squat with when I was house sitting, and you have your body, you have everything you need. Okay, so there is no one perfect formula with an arbitrary set of components that makes for the perfect at-home strength training setup. Okay, it's what you want it to be and what you choose to feature within that. So we do build workouts for folks who are strength training and engaging in movement at home. And we also build workouts for folks who are training in a more formal gym space, perhaps outside of the house. And regardless of whether or not we're creating movement sessions for home or at the gym, we kind of curate for that individual, and we do that with three things in mind. Three main things in mind. So number one, what they have to work with. So what is the setup? What type of equipment are they using? And perhaps if this is not someone who has equipment, what kind of space are they working with? And how are they going to be able to move in that space, and whether or not it's a small or a bigger space. Number two, what do they want to achieve? So as is the case for pretty much anything in movement, not everyone is strength training for the same reason. Not everyone will have the same goals or reasons or areas of focus. So what are your areas of focus and the things that you want to achieve? And how can we create a program that supports that for you? And then the third one, how much time this individual would like to spend moving. So there is a false narrative that implies if you are working out 7 days a week at 5 a.m. for at least 2 hours, your type of movement has more value than someone who is perhaps working out less. And that is so not the case, because one of the important things about establishing consistency in a training regime is building it in a way where it's going to be accessible and feasible and also sustainable for you for the long term. So it might be 20 minutes a day, it might mean an hour, and one of those is not better or more impressive than the other. Coach K.
Brilliant.
Back to you.
Okay. I'm going to unspotlight you, and I'm going to spotlight me again. Excellent. By the way, we're keeping track of the questions. These are awesome. So if you have more, pop them in the chat, and we'll for sure get to them. There's some good ones here. Okay, so really good info there on kind of the general main variables that we take into account when we're making a program. Let's get into a little more nitty gritty. And in the chat right now, I'm going to put a Dropbox link. Just give me 1 sec, I gotta paste it in. This is a PDF that you can download. Where's my link? Here it is. And it's the exact one that I'm gonna show on my screen. So just so you know, you can open that in your browser window and save it as a PDF just as a reminder. But I will show it to you right now because these are the 6 movement patterns that you want to have in your workouts. And I'll just go over them super fast. And by the way, you don't have to have these 6 movement patterns in every single workout. You want to have these movement patterns across your training week. And that's going to look different based on how many days a week you're training, right? So if you're only doing 1 or 2 strength training workouts every week, you probably want to have these 6 movement patterns in every workout. If you're working out 4 days a week, like strength training, you can space them out. So you're doing some of them on Monday, some of them on Wednesday, etc. So based on how often you're training, you don't necessarily have to do them all in the same workout. But here's the 6. So the first one is a squat. And of course, there's tons of variations. So here in the document, I put some options, but The movement pattern is a squat, and there's tons of different ways you can execute. So here I'm using a mini band on the beach, because why not? You could do a barbell squat, you can use a dumbbell, you can use a dog food bag like Coach Zoe did at the beginning of the pandemic. The point is, you want to squat. It's a lower body move that hits all of your lower body muscles. So it's super important. Much like the squat, the second move is your hinge. So a hinge is when you bring your hips back behind you versus bringing your hips down. So in a squat, you're bringing your hips down. In a hinge, you're bringing your hips behind you. These are all deadlifts. You could do a single leg deadlift. You could do a kettlebell deadlift. Right here, I'm doing a barbell deadlift. Tons of options. When you download the PDF, you can look up each of these moves if there's one that you're not familiar with. Kickstand deadlift is a variation of a single leg deadlift, for example. There's tons of videos on YouTube. Just Google them and they'll show up. But the point is, you can do it with a resistance band. You could do a body weight single leg deadlift. You just want to do some form of a hip hinge, ideally. So that's move number 2. And then this is the last lower body move. These are all lower body moves. You want to do some form of a lunge, because now we're working on strength and stability. So the first 2 moves, you have both feet on the ground at the same time. With a lunge, you're splitting your stance, and you're now also working on balance and stability while strengthening. So here I'm using a resistance band, super common option for doing lunges. You can do a body weight, you can do walking lunges. There was one point where a friend and I would get together. Actually, I think Coach Zoe came one time too when I was in Vancouver. And we did walking lunges around a 400-meter track. Zoe's like, never again. Yeah, that was fun. It's about 450 lunges, no equipment, just, for shits and giggles, basically. Anyways, lunging, you can do lateral lunges. You can do like a split squat, technically as a form of lunge. You can look them up. So those are your 3 lower body basic movement patterns. You want to make sure you have those covered in your plan. What I see a lot, just as a side note, when folks send me their workout programs, like, hey, can you take a look? Can you give me some ideas? 9 times out of 10, the one thing I will say is, A, you're missing at least a few of these 6 moves, and B, you have way too many isolation moves in your program and not enough compound moves. Isolation moves are like bicep curls or calf presses or tricep extensions, things that are only for one joint and one muscle. So you'll note that all these 6 moves that I'm showing you are all compound lifts. They use more than one joint. Doesn't mean you should never do isolation moves. They have a time and a place. But only after you've covered your compound lifts do you want to be doing isolation moves. So we get into upper body now. So upper body push is what I'm doing here with a resistance band. So it's going to come out like as a push-up kind of move. You could do an overhead press with a band as well. Tons of resistance band options. You can do a push-up, whether that's regular push-ups. You can do an incline push-up. Do folks know what negative push-ups are, where you start at the top of your push-up and then you lower yourself really slowly to the floor, like over 4 seconds, and then you just pick yourself back up and you start at the top again? Super great way of working on push-up strength. TRX, very popular at-home training piece of equipment. You can do a TRX chest press. Tons of options. Then we have a pull. By the way, this is my mom, who is the model for, oh, you know what? I think I even have it right here. I don't know if you can see me. I'm probably kind of small right now, but Resistance Bands for Seniors is a book that recently came out, and my mom, who's 70, modeled all 50 exercises over a 9-hour photo shoot that we did. She's a total powerhouse. Anyway, so what she's doing here is a resistance band row. So she's working her upper back, where her shoulder blades are, mid back, and a little bit of biceps. So the pull is super important, major muscle groups being worked. And for most of us who work at desks, extra important to do pull moves. And there's a bunch of options here. You can look up the ones that you're unfamiliar with and you'll find them on the Googles. Now, this is the one that most folks haven't heard of. Most people have heard of squats and like push-ups and stuff. This is the one where people are like, what the heck are you talking about? So if you've worked with a trainer before, you've probably done these. The only time I ever see them done is our own clients or in gyms that are like exclusively personal training studios where people go and they work with coaches. I don't know why they're not done more. It's literally just carrying heavy shit around, whether it's at the gym, whether you're standing in one place doing a march. It's super important for overall core strength and upper body strength and grip strength, which is important for general strength training, right? And there's tons of options. You can carry a weight on one side, so your obliques on the other side need to work. There's a bunch of kettlebell options. So Coach Zoe knows all these kettlebell ones where you can, have one kettlebell in the racked position and take it for a walk. You can do an overhead kettlebell waiter's walk kind of thing. The point is some form of carry in your program is super important. The only caveat here is if you're working out at home, this is the hardest one to figure out how to do at home. So for me, I could use my 30-pound accordion case and I could just carry that around. You could fill a suitcase with something. Often we'll change this to a plank for folks who only have resistance bands at home because it's also a core move, right? The whole point of this is that it hits your core and also a little bit of upper body. So in some cases, we'll change this to a plank variation. But if you're at a gym, if you have weights, if you have something heavy that you can just take for a walk, this is super important. So any questions about those? Throw questions into the chat. I see there's already some in there. And the PDF you can download. It's exactly the same thing that I'm showing you here. And it's at the Dropbox link for you to, download. Make sure you have your programs figured out, if that makes sense. So last but not least, we're going to talk about how this all kind of comes together into tracking your own progress and why things that are used very commonly like BMI and the scale are probably not the best options. So Coach Zoe's going to go into a little more detail around BMI, but I wanted to mention, I kind of feel like things are moving in this direction, right? Like we've probably seen the term weight neutral. We consider ourselves weight neutral coaches. It's becoming more common. Like people are talking about this now, which is great. It's better late than never, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. There's still a lot of like moralizing and a lot of folks who kind of judge their emotional state by what the scale says that day, So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. We just want to make the point that especially if you're strength training, I mean in general, but especially if you're somebody who's strength training, the scale is not really that useful. If you're using the scale along with other variables like your lifts at the gym, like your strength progress, your measurements, your photos, it can be a piece of the puzzle, but it's not telling us anything about your body composition. It's not really telling us muscle gain, fat loss, bone density, whether you ate that day, whether you're super hydrated or not. It's just not like enough context really. So this is why we don't really use scale weight as a measure. There's a lot of folks who are like, you got to do your weekly weigh-in or whatnot. Not really super useful. Coach Zoe will go into a little bit more around like how we approach this with the clients we work with. But in general, if you're strength training regularly and you have a plan that makes sense, so you're like progressing with your plan, and you have some kind of a, qualitative or quantitative method of measuring your own, like, do I feel good? Do I have good energy? Am I sleeping well? All of those kind of variables. Then the weight piece is pretty much moot, I'd say almost. The caveat is if you're really into tracking things, like we have some clients who are super into spreadsheets, they love graphs, they want all the details and the nerdery, which is cool. The only caveat here is don't weigh yourself if that's the only metric you're going to use. If you're going to weigh yourself, at least add body measurements and photos as well. For example, a lot of times scale weight will increase, and we've been taught that that's a bad thing, which it's not, but society tells us that that's a bad thing. But if your scale weight goes up and your measurements stay the same, or like your waist decreases, let's say, you're actually gaining muscle, most likely. That's a great thing. So our general rule is you don't have to weigh yourself if you don't want to, but if you do, use at least one, preferably two other variables at the same time. So let me spotlight Coach Zoe again, because we're going to talk about BMI for a sec, and then we'll get to a bunch of awesome questions that you have.
Okay, so before I jump into it, I just needed to to publicly celebrate this one suggestion that went into the chat. And that was when Coach K, you were speaking about alternatives to carry, at carry motion at home. And Steve said, put a harness around your cat.
Hey, my cat is 16 pounds, so I mean, it would work.
I mean, the dog I'm staying with right now is about 80. So this is something that has potential.
Water buckets.
All right.
That's a good idea.
So I'm kind of going to pick up where Coach K left off and just dive a little bit more into this discussion about weight neutrality and inclusivity as well. So I'm just going to read out weight neutral fitness as we define it. And this is actually something that comes out of our coaching philosophy. Coach K, maybe you can throw that link in the chat as well. So if any of you have not read our coaching philosophy, that is a very, very clear summary of where we stand on certain facets of the fitness industry, and especially the parts that we really want to work away from because we see them as problematic and think there's a lot of opportunity there to change the industry and see some reframing and some pivots. So weight neutral fitness means working outside of the confines of fat loss or a smaller body size as the main goal of fitness. It rejects weight, size, or BMI as accurate measures of health. This is also in line with scientific evidence, which shows that body size alone, without taking other factors into account, does not correlate with health outcomes. So within those few sentences, a few things that Coach K alluded to. So dispelling the notion that folks who are living in larger bodies are inherently unhealthy, and folks who are living in smaller bodies are inherently healthier beings, because obviously that is insanely inaccurate, because we are all different individuals with so many factors contributing to health. Number two, just to touch on BMI for a minute, because BMI, which stands for body mass index, for folks who may not be aware of that, this is something that finally is kind of being called into question, but for quite a while has been used as a standard means to calculate how much someone should weigh based purely on their height. So based on what we've spoken about, we already see the flaws in that. But the interesting thing that a lot of folks are not aware of is that the BMI was actually formulated and calculated by Adolphe Quetelet, who is a mathematician, was a mathematician, okay? So number one, he was a mathematician. And number two, when he was developing the BMI, the only individuals that he used to formulate that system were white, and they were also all men. So the obvious issues with that, begin to present themselves like this, because if we're using that as an accurate, dependable scale of measurement, it is horribly exclusionary to many, many demographics, specifically those which do not happen to be white or male. Okay, so this is why we're taking the idea of the BMI and kicking it to the curb. With all of that said, this is also not intended as a discussion to shame someone who might have fat loss goals, because some of our clients do have fat loss goals, and that is completely okay. It's problematic when we focus only on losing weight, or implying that the only reason why someone may choose to train or move their body is to lose weight. because that's when we move into this space where we're seeing a lot of restrictive diets, a preoccupation with food and body, and a damaged relationship with physical activity, right? So the industry has been problematic for several years. We see a lot of things in the industry that are rooted around shame and the concept of a perfect body or the ideal body, when in reality, it doesn't exist. Okay. People may engage in training because they want to change their body in some capacity. Folks also may engage in training and not have any goals around their body changing. They want to train to get stronger, or they want to train to feel good. All right. So when we talk about inclusivity and kind of changing up some of the rhetoric within the industry, those are just a few examples of the things that are standing out, and the things we want to keep on the radar so that folks understand that they don't need to follow some of the ideas that have been presented to them by the fitness industry previously.
Brilliant, brilliant, Coach Zoe. Thank you for that. I'm going to switch the spotlight once again. There we go. Okay, cool. So I just want to mention really quickly for folks who are new to our world, I mean, you're kind of in our world somehow because you knew about this session, but there's folks here who are our clients and there's folks here who have not worked with us. I just want to mention we do have a couple spots right now for new clients in case you're interested in joining our team. And because you're here today, just for you, if you submit an application, so we do make sure that we're, on the same page with folks and it's going to be a good fit. If you would like to submit an application to be on our team, if you do it within the next 2 days, so by the end of Saturday, you will get 15% off any and all coaching with us, as long as you book your call and submit your application in the next 2 days. So just because you're here, little thank you. If anyone is interested, you can always email me for more info, or find me on Instagram or Facebook. But just want to throw that out there. We've got a couple spots. Would love it to be folks that we met here today. And so as long as you submit an application, I'll just, I'll put the link right here in the chat. As long as you're booked in and submitted. Oh, that doesn't look like it's a clickable one. Sorry. Let me repeat that. There we go. Then, yeah, little bonus for you. So I want to go through some of these questions, and I have something on my screen right now that Runji asks. So let me just see here. This was about the mushroom question, like what kind of protein level do mushrooms have? I don't know if folks here use Google like this, but I wanted to show you a little hack. You can type in something like carbohydrates in 1/3 cup of tofu, or protein in 1 cup of mushrooms, and it has this little like info box right at the top. You don't even have to go anywhere to find the info. So most foods in their database just show up immediately. So I just put in protein in 1 cup of mushrooms, 2.2 grams, not a ton. So here's the thing with, you hear about like nutritional yeast. Note how we didn't include nutritional yeast in our really high protein foods. There's a reason for that. By calorie, it's actually really high in protein. Nutritional yeast as an example, right? If you're eating a tablespoon of nutritional yeast, out of those calories, most of them are coming from protein. The thing is, in order to get a substantial number of grams of protein, you'd need to eat like 14 cups of nutritional yeast. And who's going to do that, right? So it's kind of, I mean, okay, well, I do put it on everything, but it's kind of the same with mushrooms, right? So out of their calories, they might be high in protein, but a cup of mushrooms is a decent amount of mushrooms and you're only getting 2 grams of protein. So you kind of have to look at not just the percentage of calories that are coming from protein, but the grams themselves. Like if you need 90 grams of protein a day, 2.2 isn't going to really do a ton, right? So that's why we didn't include nutritional yeast, although it's a really good source of protein. It's just going to be like, shovel it on if you want it. Okay, so a couple more questions, and I might get Coach Zoe to do a couple of these as well. Let's see here. I have one. Oh yeah, we answered the one about TVP in North Van, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so Kathy is wondering about smoothies. I love smoothies for lunch, but don't love having protein powder every day, which is fair. Any suggestions on what to use instead of protein powder? Commonly, a suggestion is nut butters, but it's hard to get the same protein and they have a lot of fat. That's true. So again, nut butters, yeah, technically a source of protein, but more calories are coming from healthy fats in that case than proteins. So, Kathy, maybe you can confirm, like, is this for your smoothie? Like protein in the smoothie? Yeah? Okay. Let me unspotlight myself. Coach Zoe, you got any
Mhm.
suggestions there?
I would say two things come to mind for me, and it would also depend on the strength of your blender or bullet. But two things that I usually put in my smoothies. Number one, soft tofu, because it's high in protein. It incorporates and blends beautifully. And it, as most of you know, it has no taste. So it can really, really take on the flavors that you also have in the smoothie already. And then the second one, which I discovered last year and was quite delighted by, is actually frozen peas.
It sounds weird. It sounds weird, but it works.
Sounds weird. The one thing I will say, having learned from experience, is maybe start with a smaller amount, like half a cup, and then build up. Because if you get a bit excited, as I did, and dump in a very large volume, it makes for a more unique smoothie experience.
Yeah, unique is a word, right? You mean green by unique, right?
Mhm.
Oh, Steve has a good point. Peanut powder. That stuff is really high in protein.
Yes.
That's actually a good call, Steve. Yeah.
Yeah.
So PB Fit or PB2 are the two that Steve just mentioned. Yes. Very high sources of protein and delicious. So good. So Kathy, that would be really good in a smoothie actually if you don't have the peanut, or sometimes they call it peanut butter powder, but peanut powder is more accurate. Super high in protein.
Coach K, I scrolled up and there was actually, so one more question from Kathy around favorite protein powder brands. And then also from Buster, we have cheapest ways to gather workout equipment for heavy training. Uh,
Good
yeah,
question.
we got some ideas around that.
Okay, let me, I will switch us up again. Coach Zoe, can you just do a quick scroll in the chat and see if we've missed anything?
Yep.
Um,
So we have those two.
mhm.
Then we have a question regarding the 0.8 grams per kilo. I'm finding some sources online saying it's 0.8 per pound and some saying it's 0.8 per kilo. The answer comes out very differently. So can you clarify which one?
Okay,
Uh,
let's do Buster's question about training.
okay.
And by the way, on the peanut powder thing, Marlene has a good point that powdered almond butter is also kind of the same
Mhm.
concept, so also high in protein. It doesn't have to be peanut. They have all the different options. Okay, so favorite brands of protein powder, right? That was Kathy's other question. And then Buster's question around heavy training. Ooh, the heavy training. Well, let's do that one first because this is where you just get super creative and it kind of depends what moves you're going to be doing. So, for example, when Coach Zoe didn't have gym access, when all the gyms were shut down during the pandemic, her option was wearing a backpack with heavy shit in it. So, like textbooks, dog food, all the heavy random stuff in the house.
Amazing.
Put that into a backpack, and then you can do lower body moves, squats, lunges, all types of like step ups if you have a good bench. So it kind of depends what you're going to do with it. For the number 6 move, remember the weighted carry thing? You necessarily need something with a handle. So I guess you could use a backpack, but I'd probably just like find a suitcase and put textbooks in it. You could get pretty creative. If you do have a budget for more legit workout equipment, kettlebells are honestly what I would choose. I mean, I'm a little
Mhm.
biased because, well, both Coach Zoe and I are obsessed with kettlebells, but they're very compact, so they take up less space than dumbbells would. And they're a good place to start because there's so much you can do with even one kettlebell. It's even more probably than one dumbbell There's just like swings and moves specific to kettlebells that you can do. It's super fun. So I'd say backpack, suitcase, kettlebells in that order for heavy training. And then just to kind of branch off a little bit, regardless of the heavy piece, the number one thing I would recommend is those right there.
Resistance bands.
Resistance bands. Yeah, that's like your first go-to home workout option. Body weight is perfectly fine. There's tons of stuff you want to do without any equipment, but there's certain muscle groups that are harder to train, like your back, for example. So if you're not doing pull-ups and chin-ups, there's very few moves that hit our back with just body weight, and that's where things like the bands can come in. So bands, and then the second thing I would say is a suspension trainer, like a TRX. And you can get one that's for your door. So you just like throw it over your door, close the door on it, and then you can do all your moves. And shameless self promo again, hold on. Somewhere is my other resistance band book. Here we go. Resistance band book number 1 and resistance band book number 2 if you need ideas for workouts. And you can get a full body workout with those. And then Kathy's question about brands. There's so many options now. I mean, we're not necessarily saying that one is better than the other. We're just going to share our favorites. So my favorite right now is one called Planta, Planta, just because they have ridiculous flavors. I have an insane sweet tooth, like eat dark chocolate every day kind of sweet tooth. And they have flavors like peanut butter chocolate cups. They have like chocolate mint. They have some insane candy flavors. Not actually with sugar, obviously, but if you're the type of person who wants like a protein powder that tastes like maple toast crunch, for example, that would be for you, Planta. And I think Coach Zoe has one that is different, right?
So I have two that I go back and forth between. So one of them is called Profi, and it's actually a Canadian company. I will only probably suggest that for our Canadian folks, because if you're ordering it outside of Canada, it can get quite pricey. But the second one that I will recommend across the board is by a brand called Four Sigmatic. Some of you may have seen Four Sigmatic because they make drink elixirs. So they have matcha, they have turmeric beverages in little self-serve packets of this size. So they came out with a chocolate protein powder about a year ago. It is officially, I believe, called creamy cocoa flavor. And my test for protein powder is if I can put a scoop of it in a shaker cup with water and nothing else, and drink that and actually want to drink that and enjoy it. And for me, Four Sigmatic takes the lead based on that test alone. So those are my two go-tos currently.
Excellent. What was the first brand you mentioned? Runji's wondering.
Profi. So it's Profi, and they have an Oreo flavor, and they also have a caramel coffee flavor, which is quite lovely if you are a coffee human.
Love it. Okay, so we've got a couple more questions, and Finn is wondering what the difference is between the books. Honestly, not a ton. There's an extra little section in the one for seniors about modifying moves. And actually, while I'm here, just going to take a screenshot of everybody who's here on the call. It was my publisher's idea, actually. They were like, hey, we want to put out a resistance band book specifically for seniors. Do you want to, get a different model, possibly change out some of the moves? There's maybe like 5 moves that are different based on, accessibility. But it's really the same book. Top secret intel. It just has my mom as the model instead of me, basically. That's the real difference. Okay, so there were 2 questions here. One is about lunge and squat alternatives, and one is about the protein amount again. So lunge and squat alternatives for meniscus injuries when exercises that bend the knees hurt. So you know what? In this case, I would work with a physiotherapist or a sports medicine pro to make sure that moves are good, like knee friendly. A couple things come to mind though. So in our case, when we're working with a client, often we will work with their physiotherapist and get ideas and intel and stuff. The first two things that come to mind are more hip hinges and more glute bridges and hip thrusts. So they're not technically lunges or squats, but they're adjacent. They're still working the lower body. So if you're a human with, as Coach Zoe calls it, a unique knee, which we both have, and lunges and squats are not on the table, then something like a deadlift or a hamstring curl where you're lying on the ground and you're doing a curl with a stability ball towards your butt kind of thing, or a glute bridge where you have a band around your knees and you're on the ground doing a glute bridge. Those are generally more knee friendly and you're still training all the same muscle groups. So it's not necessarily about trying to find a way to squat that doesn't hurt. It might be the case that you need to do different moves. So those 6 movement patterns are, in an ideal world, but switch things out if you need to that hit the same muscle groups, if that makes sense. And then the 0.8 grams thing, it's usually 0.8 grams per kilo. That's mostly what I've seen. So the Dietitians of Canada and all the kind of large scale organizations will say, to prevent health issues or to prevent deficiencies, 0.8 grams per kilo. 0.8 grams per pound is more along the lines of that range. Remember I was telling you 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day if you're active. That's closer to that range. So that could just be specific to active folks if you do the conversion to pounds. But 0.8 grams per kilo is generally the baseline minimum. And you would just need to figure out your own needs based on your training and all the variables in our protein calculator. Okay, see a couple more folks here with questions. Oh, look at these questions from Eric. Brilliant. Oh, thanks, Kathy. Fun and informative, yay. I might get the seniors one for myself then, is what Finn says. Why not? Why not? Okay, so we got another minute or so, so let's see how many of these can we go through from Eric, okay? What's the ideal rep range per set for developing slow twitch fibers, as in predominantly slow twitch muscles? And there's a couple more things around lat raises, pull-ups and rows. Okay, and there's a keto vegan question. Ooh, keto vegan. Look at Coach Zoe, she's like, okay, let's just pick a couple because we have a call with a new client of ours that we have to get to. But let's do the pull-ups and rows question and the keto question. How about that? Does that sound good? And then Eric, if you email me, let me just put my email, in our chat here. Can you just copy and paste your question chunk into an email and I will get back to you. Does that sound good? Okay, so pull-ups and rows. The question is, how do pull-ups and rows differ in their muscle recruitment? Well, a pull-up is a vertical pull because you're starting from way up here and pulling like this. And a row is a horizontal pull where you're either sitting and you're doing like, a seated row with a cable machine, or you're on a bench and you're bent over. So the vertical piece is automatically going to include more of your shoulder, which it wouldn't if you're bent over or you're seated. So there's more delts involved. And it then just kind of depends on what variation you're doing. So a pull-up, which means palms facing away from you, is going to be more lats. A chin-up, which means palms facing you, is going to be more biceps. And it's the same deal with any sort of row. So I think there's more variables here than we could go through, but the basic difference is vertical versus horizontal and involvement of delts. So for example, right now I have a shoulder issue from playing accordion and from distance swimming, of all things. It's an overuse injury. And so I can't do anything overhead with the left shoulder right now, which means no chin-ups, which are my favorite move in the whole world. I'm seeing a sports medicine person next week, thankfully, but it does mean that I can train similar muscles by doing a seated row or a bent over row with a kettlebell or a dumbbell. I can still hit all those things. I just have to do the horizontal option instead of the vertical option, if that makes sense. Keto vegans. Coach Zoe, want to hit on keto vegans?
Oh, do I? Well, I mean, I will lead with the disclaimer that, as is the case for so many subjects we're speaking about today, we cannot dive into the complexity of this in the 1 or 2 minutes that we have. But the two things that stand out, well, the three things that stand out for me actually about keto. Number one, thus far, in terms of specific medical benefit from folks who follow a ketogenic diet, the only group of folks that have come out of studies to benefit from that are actually those with epilepsy. The studies have found that when folks who have epilepsy eat a ketogenic diet, it actually greatly reduces the number of seizures that they are having. The second point I would like to share is to put someone on everyone's radar, and that is Dr. Matthew Nagra. He is a vegan doctor. He's local to us in Vancouver. We will link everyone to him. And he is fantastic for so many reasons. And one of them is the fact that he takes a lot of, I'd say, myths, but also common things around nutrition and zooms in on them, offers really, really practical, logical approaches and explanations to them. So I can say off the top of my head, he has some information about keto, an example of something else he would explore. Him and Coach K actually just did a podcast episode about oils, and the whole approach of the no oil diet and kind of getting into that. So I would say, please check out his social media and website, because he is very, very, very brilliant. And actually, I'm going to cut myself off there because I just realized what time it is.
Yes, call. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and feel free to email me more questions. Emails in the chat. If we didn't get to your question, or if you have more questions that you think of, lately I've been doing a lot of like screen grab videos, just answering people, like showing you stuff on my screen, looking stuff up. So if there's any way that we can help, shoot me an email. Thank you all for joining us. We did record this, so for folks who want to share it, if there's someone who you think would be interested in info on strength training and protein, I'll send out the link to it. And don't forget, if you want to join our client team, check out our programs. The link to our application form is in the chat. And as long as you book your call, even if it's next week or the week after, as long as your application is in before Saturday and you mention that you were on this call, you get our super secret "thanks for joining us" 15% off. And we're always here, if you've got questions, if you have ideas, we'd love to do more of these lunch and learns. This was officially our first one. So if you have more things you want us to talk about, questions you have, BS you would like us to bust, which is our favorite thing in the world.
We really enjoy that.
Right? Let us know. And thank you so much for joining us. We will hopefully see you on another event soon.
Thank you, everyone. This was fantastic.
Yeah, great to see you. Thanks for hanging out with us.